Hey Freedom Fighters, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to give you a very quick update on where things stand with the stimulus negotiations, stimulus checks. I want to talk about not only what the numbers are and where it looks like it's heading, but what the actual issues are. What's the holdup? You may have heard of an important deadline that is actually today, October 20th of 2020, what that deadline means, what I think will happen, and if a stimulus package is passed before Election Day, and that's what everyone's talking about, when might you actually see the money? When will you get a stimulus check? When will extra unemployment benefits begin? So that's what we're going to cover in a short video today. Let's start with the deadline. As you know, there have been negotiations ongoing off and on for a couple of months now. Last week or this weekend, what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said was, I'm giving the administration until today, October 20th, to sort of finalize and come to an agreement on a framework and the language for a stimulus deal. Now, what she wasn't saying was, if we don't have an agreement today, that's it, we're done, we're not going to negotiate anymore. The point of today's deadline was so that a bill could get passed before Election Day. What she's saying is, look, if we don't have the framework for an agreement by today, we simply don't have enough time to finalize what is a fairly complicated piece of legislation, get the draft finalized, get it set for a vote in the House and the Senate and signed by the president. We're 2 weeks away from the election. If we go beyond today, we're simply not going to have enough time. So Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi are trying to hammer out the last bit of details by the end of today. If they can do that, then we stand a pretty good chance of actually having another round of stimulus passed before Election Day. Now, we'll talk about what that will mean if that happens, but first let's just make sure we know where things stand. And I'll start with the two big issues that previously were holding up a deal, and they were enhanced unemployment benefits and aid to state and local governments. Recall that way back a couple of months ago, seems like a lifetime ago, the Republicans were at $200 for enhanced unemployment benefits, $200 a week. The Democrats wanted $600, which was what the CARES Act provided for. The sticking point is that at $600, the government's actually paying individuals more than they were making to work when you add in the state unemployment benefits. And so there was some back and forth on, does it make sense for us to pay folks more not to work? And where that's come out now is they seem to have settled on $400 in extra unemployment per week. One of the things the Republicans have agreed to is to extend it a little bit longer. Now, we won't know the official details until an agreement is actually reached, so that could change. But that's kind of where we stand. And at $400 in extra unemployment benefits, it would pay the average worker about 100% of what they were making before being laid off. So that's the unemployment issue. It seems to more or less have been settled and agreed upon. Again, we'll know the details for sure once a final agreement is reached and released. State and local aid is really important, and it may not seem as important because it doesn't actually result in you or me actually getting a check or getting a specific dollar amount in our bank account. But it's critical because unlike the federal government, most states cannot borrow for operating expenses. And that includes things like paying firefighters and police officers and teachers. And they have a pretty big budget shortfall as a result of COVID-19. So long story short, Republicans initially were at zero. They proposed not giving state and local any funding. The Democrats wanted almost $1 trillion. Not to get into the politics of it, but frankly, both positions were absolutely absurd. Long story short, they've come down and they're at $300 billion. And I think that's where they're going to end up. That is more than enough to cover state budget shortfalls for at least the next year. So that's pretty significant. Now, those were the two sticking points. They seem to have gotten past them. There's another sticking point, though, that's come up. Before I get to it, let me mention stimulus checks because I know everyone is interested in that, and just checking my notes here. With stimulus checks, there has been a development. So the standard payout, as you know, is $1,200. In the CARES Act, there were $500 payments for dependents, but there was an age limitation. What the Republicans have proposed is we'll stick with the $1,200 for taxpayers. For children dependents, we'll go to $1,000, and for adult dependents, $500. That's where it stands now. Now you may be saying, well, why did the Republicans agree to go to $1,000? That's a pretty big jump for children, child dependents. And the answer to that gets us to the remaining two issues, and really I think we're down to one, that they're trying to hammer out. First, the one that I think they've resolved. The Democrats wanted to include expansion of tax credits, the earned income tax credit, child tax credit. These are in part refundable tax credits, meaning that individuals can receive money from the government from these refundable tax credits, even if they don't owe any taxes. And so these refundable tax credits are a way to put money into the pockets, frankly, of the poor. I mean, that's what they're designed to do. The Democrats, as part of the CARES Act, wanted to expand them. And I think what the Republicans said was, no, we need to keep a lid on costs, and we're already doing enough with the stimulus checks and unemployment. And I think just as part of that negotiation, what the Republicans decided to offer was, hey, rather than doing those tax credits, we'll increase the stimulus check for child dependents, and we'll go from $500 to $1,000. I think that's likely going to resolve the issue. It doesn't satisfy Democrats, but here's sort of the unspoken thing that not everyone talks about. Expansion of tax credits as part of this package will never get past the Senate. It'll be dead on arrival. So I think they've found common ground by extending to $1,000 the stimulus check for child dependents. Now, the last sticking point is a national strategy for testing, tracing, and treatment. When I first saw this, I thought, wait a minute. I know the Democrats are for this, but I mean, do Republicans not want a strategy? I don't know. I mean, I know there are differences between the two parties, but surely the Republicans want a strategy. When I dug into the issue, then it became clear they both want a strategy. The question is, who determines that strategy? What the Democrats say is, we want the national government to determine the strategy nationwide. And what the Republicans have said is, look, each location is different. The strategy in New York shouldn't necessarily be the strategy in Topeka. And so we want the states to determine their own strategy. And that's been the tension. And I think ultimately the way it's going to play out, Republicans have sort of conceded on this issue. And they've agreed, fine, we'll have a national strategy for testing, tracing, and treatment. What's left, though, is exactly the language of that strategy. What the Democrats want is language in the statute that uses words like shall and must to sort of force the administration, the executive branch, to do exactly what the statute tells them to do. What the Republicans have said is, look, a national strategy is fine, but let's use discretionary language like may rather than shall. That gives flexibility to the administration to actually make decisions as circumstances change. I'm not here to say which one's better or worse, right or wrong. What I am here to tell you is that really is the final issue that they are trying to resolve. We'll find out by the end of today whether they have resolved it. And really, everything else comes down to this one issue. If they can resolve the language on the national strategy for testing, tracing, and treatment, I think we'll have a deal before Election Day. If they don't, then, well, we won't have a deal before Election Day. Having said that, if I were wagering a bet, I would say they will come to a deal. Why? Well, on the one hand, I think President Trump is desperate for a deal because obviously he's got an election coming up and he wants to show the American people that there's help from the federal government. And he's even said, frankly, he would go even bigger than both what the Republicans and the Democrats are proposing. That's not going to happen. But he certainly very much wants a deal. And I think from Nancy Pelosi's side, she too wants a deal. She's been getting a lot of pushback from other House Democrats saying, look, we appreciate you feel strongly about some of these issues, but don't let them keep us from giving needed help to American people. So they both have their own pressures. And so I think ultimately a deal will be reached by the end of today. Now, That leaves us with two issues. One, even if they reach a deal today, will it pass? Because they still got to get the House and the Senate to vote for it. And if it does, when will you actually begin to see things like a stimulus check and unemployment benefits? So as to the first question, it will clearly pass in the House if Speaker Pelosi, endorses it, and that's the only way it'll ever get a vote anyway. No question it'll pass in the House. Bigger question in the Senate, because McConnell can actually stop it from going to the Senate floor for a vote. And you may say, well, why would he do that? He would do that if enough Republicans said, look, we want to help American people, but this is just too much money. We're already at nearly $2 trillion in this package, 1.9 trillion. And we've already spent about $3.5 trillion. Our deficit in fiscal 2020 that ended at the end of September was over $3 trillion. Yes, people need help, but we can't lose sight of the bigger picture, and it's just too much money. Having said that, President Trump has come out and said, don't worry about the Senate Republicans, I'll deal with them. That's kind of tricky because right now, President Trump, I'm not sure he has a lot of influence, frankly, over the Senate, given his election prospects. And I'm not making a political judgment here or saying my own personal views one way or another. That's just sort of the reality playing out in Washington. Having said that, I do think enough Republicans will support this, it's my own personal opinion, that McConnell will put it to a vote. And if he does, it will certainly pass because you'll get all the Democrats to support it as well. So I think if they reach a framework today, it's not a given that it'll pass the Senate, but I think on balance, it likely will. If it does, it becomes law before Election Day. And I would expect that to happen probably by the end of next week would be my best guess. How quickly will you see the benefits? Well, Stephen Mnuchin has already come out, this was a couple of months ago, and said, look, on the stimulus checks, I can get them out in about a week. We've got this figured out now. We did the last round, obviously. And so folks, I think, would start to receive stimulus checks. And for many, they're not actually checks, they're direct deposits by the end of November. That would be my best guess if this passes into law before Election Day. Unemployment, I think, will also happen pretty quickly, but there the wild card is the money flows through each state's unemployment systems. A lot of those systems are ancient, but they've already done this once before, so I think they've ironed out the kinks. As long as it's just a flat payment, say $400 extra a week, they should be able to implement that very quickly. I would expect that to start reaching people. If not by the end of November, all the stimulus checks, didn't I? Sorry, end of October. Middle of November. I got to get my dates right. So it'll pass by the end of October before the November election. I would expect the stimulus checks by the middle of November. Apologize for that. About a week or two after it passes. And the unemployment benefits, certainly I think they would kick in by the end of November. So that would be the timing if this passes. So again, if we get a framework today, it gets passed before the election, sometime towards the end of October, I would expect stimulus checks in the first half of November and unemployment benefits to kick in certainly by no later than the end of November. And there you go. That's the timing. That's all of the issues at play right now. And what I'll do if this thing does pass and we actually get to see a copy of it, I will update this video or update with a new video with all of the details on exactly what you can expect and, frankly, how much this is going to cost and how it's going to impact the deficit and the debt. That may or may not be important to you. But, the day will come when we have to pay for this, believe it or not. So that's the status. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. And until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.